Well, welcome everybody, and if you're on the East Coast time zone, good afternoon at this point officially. Thank you for joining us for our first generation symposium of student success today, and helping us wrap out our week of events for celebrating the accomplishments and achievements of first gen students and making sure that we are doing everything as a community and as a campus to help support first gen students as well. We are joined for our keynote speech by Dr. Cynthia Mosqueda. Dr. Cynthia Mosqueda is the faculty coordinator for the first year experience program at El Camino College, located in Torrance, California. The El Camino College's first year experience program has received accolades for exemplary program status through the Academic Senate for California Community Colleges and through the California Community College Chancellor's Office for outstanding contributions towards student success, transfer, and retention of first-generation students. In 2012, Dr. Mosqueda received the First Year Advocate Award from the National Center for First Year Experience and Students in Transition from the University of South Carolina for her work in helping first-year students transition into college life. Dr. Mosqueda holds degrees in psychology, counseling, and a doctorate in educational leadership from UCLA. She has been a strong advocate for community college policy and is currently serving her second term as board member of the Faculty Association of California Community Colleges, representing 116 colleges in Southern California. In addition, Dr. Mosqueda chairs the Professional Development Committee for FACCC and coordinates numerous conferences throughout the year, such as the National California Great Teacher Seminar, Counseling and Inclusion, and Online Teacher Education. Dr. Mosqueda is an adjunct professor at the USC Rossier School of Education and works with graduate students pursuing a degree in counseling who are interested in working with K-12 and community college students. So please give a warm welcome to Dr. Cynthia Mosqueda.
I should have given you a shorter bio.
That was perfect.
It's so long. I'm so glad you made me a co-host. I let some people in. I hope you don't mind. They were in the waiting list.
Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, so thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you so much for inviting me to your campus. It's so great to be able to spend my Friday morning with another community college. I was actually on a virtual Zoom earlier this week with Mississippi State University, and so it was so great to see some of the work that they are currently doing. But I have to admit, I was really excited about today, just because there's not a lot of us that are doing a lot of the first gen work around the United States. And I'll tell you a little bit about how we got involved in the work. So it's so great to see another community college. I love it. So thank you so much. Really the goal for today is to share a little bit about what we've been doing at El Camino College and how we got started in this work in terms of first gen. Before I get into my presentation, I wanted to show you a quick video. Sometime last year, PBS came to us. They had heard about some of the work that we were doing at our institution. And so they asked if they can come and do a story. Now, you don't know me, but one of the things that folks who do know me know that I'm a bit of an introvert. So when I am invited to do any kind of media kind of speaking engagement, I really have to think about, wait, this is going to be shown all over the community college experience. So I tapped one of my wonderful counselors, Saranda Bray, who's lovely, who loves a lot of this media. And I said, Saranda, do you want to do this interview with PBS? And she said, yes. And so you're going to see her in the video. You're not going to see me, but she is absolutely amazing. So let me just share my screen so that we can play the video real quick, and then I'll get into the presentation. So hopefully you can see the screen.
It was just amazing to hear that I wasn't alone.
Not alone. Instead, surrounded by fellow students, experiencing the same new and challenging chapter in their lives. That's what this First Gen Circle is all about at El Camino College in Torrance. Everyone here is the first in their family to attend college. Saranda Bray leads the group.
When I was a first-gen student, there weren't first-gen initiatives like this. And so sometimes I did feel like, oh, this is just me having this experience. Everyone else has it together. They know. But I think it's really beautiful when you get to see like, oh my gosh, we're all part of this together. As first-gen students, like we have mad skills, y'all. We come with so many strengths and so many things that we've learned growing up.
Surrenda is part of a campus-wide initiative helping first-generation students navigate the often intimidating college experience. Help includes early steps like signing up for classes, scheduling office hours with professors, even securing financial aid and career counseling. Perhaps most important, quelling any signs of discouragement or self-doubt.
What I share with students is checking those negative voices that sometimes creep into our psyche, and also reminding them like, you earned this, like everything that you have, like you've earned, you've worked very hard, like it's not luck.
It was hard, in the beginning, especially. Once again, you feel lost, you feel like an imposter, you feel like you're not good enough, but I'm grateful for the resources I have. It's amazing to have this community and these people who are going through the same thing as you.
El Camino College has almost 30,000 full and part-time students. More than half of them are first generation. It's a percentage similar to many other community colleges throughout California.
For first generation students, and I'm one myself, so I could speak to it firsthand, the language of higher education is in some cases foreign. It's a foreign language. So we have to somehow demystify the college going process.
Many students have a deficit mindset. I'm coming in with all these barriers, and how can I think I'll be successful? I don't belong here. This isn't for me.
Dina Maloney, president of El Camino College, says the idea for a major first-gen initiative began with her faculty members. Maloney, also a first-generation college graduate, embraced the plan. And soon enough, so did the entire campus.
It turns out that almost 120 of our faculty members are first-generation students. We help students see we were first gen. At one point, we were in your shoes. And look how far we've gone, and that's how far you can go if you want.
My career goal is to open up a bakery. It helped me to know that I wasn't alone, that I wasn't the only student feeling like this, and it provided a community. And for me, that was a huge, huge thing.
What you got here?
Daryl Thompson is another first-generation college graduate and one of the professors who helped create the program. He often brings that shared experience into his instruction. In this class, he's invited students to bring in images they've captured, reflecting some of their challenges.
That lack of time that students have, especially first-generation students.
Being a teacher is so rewarding on its own, but to transform those lives that didn't think they were transformable or thought maybe they weren't qualified or it wasn't meant for them, it's a really wonderful feeling, and it's super fulfilling.
For my mom, I put high school or equivalent.
Brian Gomez went straight from a small-town high school to UC Merced, but the adjustment was difficult and he dropped out. Now he says he's much more confident as a student, and after finishing at El Camino, he plans to return to the university, get a master's degree, and become a college counselor.
They've helped me out so much. If it wasn't for them, reaching out and picking me up, I wouldn't be where I am today, and I would love to do that for other people in the future.
Studies show programs like this help students stay in school and often graduate sooner. Because of its success, El Camino was the only community college receiving top honors from First Forward, a nationwide program started by the nonprofit Center for First Generation Student Success.
I would love to see all 115 community colleges in the state of California develop a first-gen initiative, and based on our formula, or tailoring it to your own campus.
All students should have access to these kinds of resources. If we can make that happen, it'll be fabulous.
These students say college offers a chance to change the trajectory of their own lives and that of their families, even their communities. With knowledge comes power, new economic opportunities, and a better future.
I see that there's other people that are also going through similar things as me, and it made me feel confident as a student because now I feel ready for the world.
If somebody tells you you can't do it, prove them that you can do it, and you are capable, and you're good enough, and you can do it.
Great. Okay, so that was our video. As you can see, Saranda did an amazing job.
Hi, everyone. My name is Aaron Friedland,
about
and it's a
that.
pleasure to be here with you and share a brief history of reading with you.
Love how YouTube just goes right into the next video. Okay, so let me now share my screen. Also, I think the chat is open, right, Josh? So throughout my presentation, if you have any questions about some of the initiatives, some of the phases of our initiative, feel free to go ahead and type them into the chat. And then then Josh, if you could just let me know that there's certain questions on this particular area.
Absolutely.
That'd be great. Yeah. So let me just share my screen. Okay. I think it's important that if I'm going to talk about first gen, I have to share my own first gen story. So I want to talk a little bit briefly about first the photo on the left. That is the 1985 Toyota Corolla. Not really I would say the most attractive car that you would want to own. But I actually left high school at a pretty young age. My parents owned a restaurant in the neighborhood that I grew up. They owned a Mexican restaurant. And at the end of my sophomore year, I always felt a little bit older, kind of an older spirit, and partly because I had to do, I had to learn a lot at a very young age in terms of helping my parents out with their business. And so I convinced my parents at the end of my sophomore year if I can take the high school exit exam and graduate from high school, and they were okay with it as long as I was going to earn a high school diploma. Now, obviously, if anybody knows, taking a high school exit exam does not qualify you for college. You can't apply to a university. You've not met the A through G requirements. And at the end of my sophomore year, I was working in my parents' restaurant, and I was saving all my tips. And I had saved up enough money to purchase this car. There was just one problem with this car that I was aware of, but my parents were not aware of. It did not go in reverse. So it had some transmission problems, but that was okay. I still bought the car because I wanted a car to get me around town over the summer. After a couple of months, my parents were like, you cannot continue to drive this car around town. You're going to get into a car accident. You're going to cause a car accident. Something's going to happen. You have to fix the car. And my local community college was sending these flyers to our home about courses that they were offering. So I drove the car to the local community college, and I drove it into the automotive tech shop. And a gentleman by the name of Hiram Haranaka, who was the professor at that time, came outside, and I said, I have this flyer. It says that I could sign up to take a transmission course at this campus. But I want to know, if I sign up for your class, can I fix my own car because it doesn't go in reverse? And he didn't believe me. And he said, you would not buy a car that doesn't go in reverse. I go, I did buy a car that doesn't go in reverse. And I've been driving around town for a couple of months. So he went and got into my car, and sure enough, it didn't go in reverse. And he just laughed so hard for a good 20 minutes. And then he said, yes, you can take my class, but you have to work on it. You have to pay for all the parts. You have to do everything. We're not going to help you out. And I said, sure, not a problem. And so I enrolled in his class, my very first class in higher education. I actually took 3 at the same time: automotive technology. I took intro to transmissions and brake and alignment all at the same time. And if you don't know about automotive courses, they are high unit courses. So they pretty much took up my entire day from 8 to 5 p.m. And some evening classes as well. I enjoyed the classes so much. I enjoyed the folks that I've met in some of these classes, that I really fell in love with learning again. I think that that's something I had lost in my K through 12 experience, and something that I gained in being in that program. So to make a long story short, my first degree in higher education is actually an associate's in science in automotive technology from El Camino College, the very campus that I work at today. That photo that you see on the right, believe it or not, that is me in the center. I don't know why I look so angry. And as you can see, the hairstyle really hasn't improved in all these years. It's not been my forte. But that photo on the right-hand side is what I would call my first gen squad. All of us in that photo are first gen. 3 of us in that photo are actually immigrants to this country. You know, all of us went on eventually to earn our bachelor's degrees. There's actually 3 people in this photo right now who are surgeons. They're medical surgeons, and they're on the front lines right now. In fact, I had 3 of the folks in this photo participate in my very own first gen panel that I hosted last week at El Camino College. So I'll talk a little bit about why that first gen squad for so many students is really critical to their success, right? In addition to having the folks in my peers, I also had my faculty members, folks from student affairs, counselors that were also part of my first gen network. So I wanted just to share a little bit about my own first gen story before I talk about some of the work that we've done at El Camino College. So first gen has really come to the forefront, especially within the last 5 years. I do want to, you know, acknowledge the amazing work that TRIO programs have been doing for years in supporting first gen students, because in my opinion, they really are the pioneers around the first gen initiatives and in the work that they've all been doing. But there have been some other things that have come up in the last 5 years, particularly Michelle Obama. She has launched a series of videos around the first gen experience. She herself identifies as first gen. And so some of these videos, if you've not had an opportunity to see them, I would encourage you to go onto YouTube. You can see some of the videos. In fact, one of the students that she interviews is a student from El Camino College. And I've gotten so many phone calls about that. Cynthia, how did you pull that off? I didn't do anything. I didn't pull off anything. We just got really lucky that she interviewed a student that was going to El Camino College. The photo on the far right is from the Center for First Generation Success through NASPA. They have some amazing resources for folks, for faculty, for people in student affairs. If you've not gone onto their website, I would definitely encourage you to go on their website. I think they've done an excellent job of dividing research and practices and being able to see what other campuses are doing across the nation right now. And then obviously your campus is participating in National First Gen celebration activities, which took place over the weekend. Our campus celebrated the week before. So I think it's great. Your institution is already participating in some of the national celebrations for First Gen students. On the right, that is actually the logo for the University of California. This is how we got involved in the work. About 5.5 years ago, my counterpart, Dr. Latanya Miles Reese, in case you're not familiar with her work, she's really amazing. You should have her on your campus next year when you're celebrating First Gen. She invited me to their First Gen Symposium at UCLA. And by the time I got to my car in their parking lot, I realized this is something we need to be doing. Why aren't we doing first gen work at our own institution? I think sometimes there's this belief that, oh, well, if the majority of your students are first gen, then do you really need first gen programming? And yes, you do, because you need some intentional first gen programming as well. And so really it was through the University of California that El Camino really got involved in some of the first gen work. So a little bit about how we defined first gen at our own institution. So bullet 2 and bullet 3 has 2 different definitions. Neither parent or guardian earned a 4-year college degree. And then neither parent or guardian earned a 4-year college degree in the US. A little bit later, I'll be talking about our first gen student task force, but it was really through them where we decided that the bullet point number 3 was going to work better, that neither parent or guardian earned a 4-year college degree. And the reason for that in the US, and the reason for that is because we had international students who were part of our task force. And they said to us, we feel like first gen students as well, because the American educational system is so different from the countries that we're coming from. And so a lot of the programming that you are already doing for first gen students, we are benefiting from that programming as well. So continue it, do more of it. And so that is how we came to, that definition. Close to about 73% of institutions now have a working definition. And so one of the things that we've done at our institution is we have made sure that all of the programs on our campus that collect data use that definition to collect data so that it's more accurate, it's more up to date. It has also helped us when we are applying for federal grants, when we're applying for state grants as well. We have a couple of grant partnerships with our local universities, Loyola Marymount, Mount St. Mary's, as well as some of the UCs where we have joint grants. And so this data has been really helpful. I'm in California, so California has, we just actually added a new community college. And I don't know if you caught that, but in that video, Saranda said 115 community colleges. Well, we have added another one, Madera Community College. So we are now at 116 community colleges in California. It's really difficult for the entire system to agree on one definition. We have not yet been successful in changing the definition for all 116 campuses. That's something that we're actually working on with our chancellor right now to try to change. But at El Camino locally, we have used that second definition. So I definitely always encourage campuses that if you don't have a working definition yet, this is definitely a good starting point that maybe you all, could get to a consensus on across student affairs, as well as across the academic programs that exist at your institution. Also, more than 3 out of 10 school-age children in the U.S. will identify as first gen, the first to go in their families, right? So this population is definitely increasing. And many of them are coming to community college for the very first time. A couple of other things to know about first gen, and I think before people got on this call, I was able to talk to Josh and ask him about some of the programming that's already happening. And he shared with me that you had a panel earlier this week about how students were talking about, first gen plus, right? Because many of our first gen students also have other intersectionality that they identify with, right? I was first gen and I was also an immigrant, right? So we have a lot of students who could be first gen and they could be part of the LGBTQ plus community, right? You can be first gen and a parent, coming back to college. So I think this is important when you are putting programming together to make sure that you have this in mind. One of the initiatives that we've done here at my own institution around first gen, we've worked with first gen and our LGBTQ plus community on campus and some of the clubs and organizations to make sure that we are also being intentional about the type of programming that they are getting at our institution as well. Okay, so some of this you might already know, but it is important. I do want to cover it because it means so many different things for so many different students. So, my campus, we're a community college, and so we're a commuter campus. So many of our first gen students, unfortunately, right now, we do not have any kind of housing. Although there are some community colleges in our area, Cerritos College for one, that is now working to provide housing for their community college students. But we know that many first-gen students have to live off campus. Even when they go to the university, many of our first-gen students are commuter students. When I went to UCLA, I did not live on campus. I was not residential. I commuted, and you do lose a little bit of that, university experience, right? Also, a lot of our first-gen students who are going to the university tend to be transfer students as well. So they have that transition. Sometimes they experience, what's called transfer shock when they get to the university for the first time. And then also keep in mind that a lot of our first-gen students sometimes are the cultural brokers or translators for their families, right? So in my case, I was definitely the translator for my parents. I helped them fill out their business permits. I helped them secure contracts with vendors for certain supplies that we needed for the restaurant, right? But also, this is not unique to the immigrant community. I also had plenty of friends in college that were still the translators for their families, right? My friend who was African American, her parents relied on her to look at all the mail, make sure everything was correct, make sure they were paying their property taxes on time and that they weren't doing anything incorrectly. She was the person in her family that everybody went to when something had to be reviewed or something had to be approved. So that's another role that many of our first gen students also play when they are experiencing higher education. There's also this misconception that many of our first gen students are low income. That's not the case for all of our first gen students. Many of our first gen students are low income and in many cases are receiving financial aid, but not all of them. I have plenty of students. Our institution is in Torrance, California. We are probably about, on a good day, 15 minutes away from LAX, maybe about a half an hour away from downtown LA. We're very close to the beach cities. So many of our students are actually coming from affluent, wealthy areas, but mom and dad might not have gone to receive a bachelor's degree, and they are first gen in their families. So it's actually, at my institution, the majority of our first gen students would not be considered to be low income, but would be considered to be first gen. And then many of our students sometimes feel disconnected from families and friends when they are, going to a campus for the very first time. Also keep in mind, a lot of times, our first gen students are pursuing higher education, but maybe their friends are not. Maybe their family members and their cousins are not, and that becomes a little bit difficult. I know that when I was attending El Camino, and driving that 1985 Toyota Corolla, my friends were out there getting a job and buying a new car. And that was definitely difficult to see, right? And so a lot of our first gen students sometimes experience that as well. Academic imposter syndrome, and hopefully you've maybe have already talked about that in some of your other sessions. But I think what's important to note about academic imposter syndrome is that for many first gen students, it never goes away. It stays with you in some cases in graduate school. It stays with you as a first gen professional as well. This is a conversation I have consistently. I also teach at the University of Southern California. I teach in the graduate program. And many of my students are first gen grad students as well. They even have an organization on campus just specifically to talk about the academic imposter syndrome, because they still feel in many cases that they have to prove themselves again and again, right? Many of them still can't believe they got admitted to USC and that it's going to be a mistake and someone from admissions is going to come into my classroom and pull them out. And I'm like, that's not going to happen. You're fully qualified for that, right? Or like Saranda talked about, like this feeling that it's just luck, that is how you arrived. So that is something that many of our first gen students experience when they're going into higher education. And then the last bullet point, then I'll ask Josh if there's any questions for me in the chat in a minute, is the golden child phenomena as well, which many first gen students experience. I can tell you that my best friend in college experienced this. He was the person in his family that was going to change everything from them. He was the person that was going to get his degree and eventually be able to help his family buy a home, be able to help his family buy a car. He had a lot more weight in college than I think I did. My parents never put that kind of, responsibility on me. They wanted me to go to college and, earn my degree, but my success was never contingent on, what their livelihood was going to look like 5 or 10 years from now. And for many of our students, especially who are first gen, will experience this golden child where everything is kind of placed on them. And it's important that they be successful. Any questions, Josh?
We've had some love for 1985 and 87 vehicles as first vehicles. And then we had some kudos for just a great testimonial for community colleges and kind of being a gateway opportunity for folks as well.
That's why I always wanted to work in one.
Yeah.
I became a believer for sure. Okay, then I will continue on. So let's talk also a little bit about the hidden curriculum. It's a term that we often use to discuss first-gen students because many first-gen students experience this in college. And the hidden curriculum refers to the unspoken or implicit values or behaviors or procedures and norms that exist in educational settings. Often when I'm talking to my students, and we're talking about whether it's community colleges or it's university, it has its own culture, it has its own customs, right? It has its own way of doing things. This was actually created by my really good friend, who I already mentioned, Dr. Latanya Miles-Reese at UCLA. She created these for her orientation when students come to campus at UCLA, and they just kind of flash from time to time while students are waiting in the auditorium to let students know it's okay. You don't have to raise your hand to go to the bathroom. You can go on your own, right? A lot of things that might seem normal to most students are not always, something that first-gen students know that they are allowed to do. I oversee a first-year experience program. I've been overseeing that program for the last 20 years. And I still get first-gen students who come to me and say, what time is the bell schedule going to begin, right? And it's like, oh, we don't have a bell schedule here. Let's talk about that, right? So just these little tidbits that I encourage those of you, if we have anybody who's on the call who works specifically in outreach or in orientation, these are great little tidbits to use in your orientations. That's one of the things that we started to do at El Camino College when we host different types of programs for students. But the hidden curriculum also could be the very space, right, that exists at your institution. One of the things that we did at El Camino is we took a walking tour to figure out what is the hidden curriculum for our first-gen students. And we did this with our first-gen student task force to get an idea. And one of the students on the walking tour, before we got to the second building, stopped us and he said, can we just stop and have a conversation about the campus map? And we said, yeah, what are you talking about? And he said, when I first came to El Camino College, it is so difficult to find buildings on this campus. He said, for example, your admissions office is not called the admissions office, right? It's called, such and such. And so I went to this other building thinking that's where admissions was at. He went to the administration building because we actually do have a building. It's called the administration building. And he said, I assumed that admissions was housed in administration, and it turns out it wasn't. And so then all the students started to say, yeah, the campus map in itself doesn't make sense to many of us. It's not really labeled. Some of the buildings are named after certain individuals, right? Which makes it even more difficult. So as a result of those conversations, we have put a lot of signs up around campus to let students know counseling is this way, admissions and records is located in this direction, outreach is over here. We really have gotten a lot of feedback from how our students experience our campus, but the physical space, even for some students, can be a barrier. So a great exercise, I think, for institutions to really do a walking tour of your own campus to see, like, are there certain barriers that are set up for first-gen students that might not come natural to them? Okay. And so, also, in terms of some of the amazing work that's come out of first-gen initiatives now is this shift from a deficit to a more asset-based lens when it comes to first-gen students. If you're not familiar with the work of Yoso, she was originally at UCLA. I want to say now she might be at UC Riverside or Santa Barbara. Yoso's work really touches upon the capital that many of our students bring. She talks about different types of capital. She talks about family capital. A lot of times when you have conversations with first-gen students and you ask them, why are you in college? Where's your motivation coming from? Often they will say their family, that their family is the reason that they are in college, that they want to earn their degrees. And so Yoso really talks about honoring the family and trying to include the family in a lot of the programming that exists around first gen work. And that's something that we've tried to do at El Camino. She also talks about community capital, because many of our students are coming from communities that they represent and that they value, and that they want to integrate into their own higher education pursuit. And she talks about linguistic capital. A lot of our students come to college. They've already learned one, if not multiple languages. And so, you know, there is such a thing as code switching for many of our students when they come to college as well. So she talks about that kind of capital. And so a second researcher that if you're not familiar with, and allow me to introduce you to her, is Dr. Laura Rendon. She's now retired. But she basically talks about validation theory. She actually conducted some of her research at our institution, at El Camino College, with some of our students. And she talks about how many first-gen students need some form of validation. That doesn't always need to come from faculty, by the way. I can tell you that my validation, without a doubt, came from Hiram Haranaka, my automotive instructor. You know, always being there for me, always checking on me, you know, making sure everything was going well at the institution, and then connecting me to a resource, really helping me build a network while I was at the institution. But for many of our students, that validation can come from maintenance workers. It can come from janitors. It can come from the, you know, people who work in your food services area. I know, you know, when I think of a second individual that really made me feel comfortable at El Camino, it was actually a gentleman by the name of Ricky Gonzalez. He was responsible for all the setups of any event that happened at our institution. So if we had a club event or anything like that, Ricky was the one who would come, set up the chairs, set up the screens, set up the projectors. And I was always there early. So I got to know Ricky. I got to talk to him. We became friends. We are still friends to this day. Ricky still works at my institution. He hasn't retired yet. I don't know why, but he hasn't retired yet. But you know, he's somebody that took the time to say hello, right? Just even that, like, hello, you belong here. You are welcomed is really important for our students. And then I think something else that's equally important when you're thinking about like really shifting that deficit lens, right, is that many of our first gen students, they are resilient, right? They have already in a lot of ways overcome a lot of barriers, and they are pioneers in their family, right? They are the first to go to college and really try to earn that degree. That photo that you're seeing is a first gen panel that we hosted, I want to say not this year, but the year before. We hosted a first gen symposium, and we try to make sure that the panel was representative of the students that come to El Camino College. We have a single parent that's part of this panel. We have a veteran that's part of this panel. We have a student on the panel who's deaf and hard of hearing. It's also really important to include students, again, when you're thinking about that intersectionality, right, that we have students that are represented across campus. And you know, and they talked about their experiences. So they did an amazing job. I recorded this. I still go back and look at it from time to time. And then let me just talk a little bit about where we started, how we started. Everybody starts this work, you know, from a different lens. But at El Camino, what we did, our first phase, by the way, that's LaTanya right there on the left-hand side, hugging one of my colleagues. Chris Hurd, that is her. She's amazing. If you're not familiar with her work, she created a great Facebook group called Empowering First Gen. So for those of you who are on social media, and if you're on Facebook, check out her group. It's called Empowering First Gen. Thousands of folks are on it who are doing first gen work all across the country. Okay, but back to what I was saying. So I digressed. So our first phase was to establish a first gen task force. And you know, this is a lot to do for one individual. It is a lot to do for one office. First gen shouldn't just live in first year experience, or it shouldn't just live in student affairs. And so we wanted to make sure that we had representation across campus. That is, that photo on the right is a photo from one of the events that we hosted at the college. And the photos on the left, that is our First Gen Task Force meeting. We meet 3 times every semester. Sometimes we have a subcommittee when we are working on different events throughout the academic term. And we have representation from financial aid, from advising, from the president's office. We have 2 vice presidents who are part of the task force. We have a couple of academic deans, as well as the Dean of Student Affairs and the Dean of Student Life. And then we also have faculty. We have instructional faculty. And that was really important to us because, again, we are a community college, we're a commuter campus. And so it's our instructional faculty that really spend the most amount of time with our students in the classroom. And, you know, we tried to set up these dates ahead of time so that faculty, as well as like everyone else who's on the committee, that they know when the dates are going to be and you know, when we meet. We're not at our institution right now. We are also working virtually right now. But when we were in person, a way that I would get them to come is we would feed them lunch. So there was always a lunch, and we try to host this meeting during our college hour. El Camino does have a college hour where we don't hold any classes during that time. It's usually from 1 to 2 p.m. on a Tuesday and a Thursday. So that's always a great time to have a meeting at our institution. So after we established the task force, we decided that we wanted to know, well, who is First Gen at El Camino? How many First Gen faculty do we have? How many First Gen staff do we have? And then how many First Gen administrators do we also have at our campus? So we sent out a survey to the entire campus. We were fortunate that our college president identifies as the first to go in her family. So we asked her if she would send out the survey. You always want to ask the college president, right? The more people are likely to respond to a survey when the college president sends it out than if I send it out. And we asked them a couple of different things. One, if they were the first to go, but we also asked them, would you be willing to mentor a First Gen student? Would you be willing to serve on a First Gen panel, maybe during our new student orientation day? We wanted to know if they would be open to wearing First Gen swag, you know, during National First Gen Week. So there was a couple of items that we asked faculty what they would be willing to do. And then we took this data, dumped it into, you know, like an Excel sheet, and kind of started going through the data to identify the different academic departments across campus and where we had the most amount of First Gen faculty. And we held on for it for a couple of weeks before we decided, okay, this is how we're going to tap into this information, this data later on when we do some more First Gen programming. The photo of the gentleman right there, that is Dr. Goldenberg. He is a history professor on campus. And that is from one of the events that we had on campus. So if you've not implemented some kind of survey, I would encourage you to maybe consider doing something like this. We share this survey with any institution who's interested. You know, it was not a lot of questions to ask, but it really helped us to identify who our First Gen folks were on campus. Josh, any questions in the chat before I move on?
We've had a few folks kind of talk a little bit about, you know, what their experience or what their impressions would be of the Golden Child, talking a little bit about the, you know, hidden curriculum and higher ed specific terms that we still continue to use, things like bursar, that it's a whole nother language we're expecting these students to know once they get to college. And then just some good discussion about the hidden curriculum as well, what it was like to study abroad. Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. Great. Yeah, studying abroad. That was hidden for me for a while, but eventually got there. So what we decided at El Camino was that we really wanted to kick off this initiative specifically with our faculty in mind. Not the students, believe it or not. We didn't go to the students just yet. And the reason for that was because our demographics really have changed dramatically at my institution. When I was hired, we had a very low number of first-gen students that were attending El Camino. And then that number just kept going up and kept going up. Our campus also at the time I got hired was not too diverse, and it really started to change about 10 years in. And so because we had such changes in demographics, we decided that it was better to start with some of our faculty and do some professional development training. So we paired up with our Professional Development Institute at El Camino College. Our faculty are required to do a certain number of, professional development hours throughout the academic year. And so we gave faculty flex credit for attending this event, as well as a free lunch. And then we partnered up with a lot of our local universities. So El Camino is fortunate. I mean, any direction that you go, you're going to run into a university or another community college. I mean, that's why we have 116 campuses here. So we partnered up with our colleagues at California State, Long Beach, Dominguez Hills, UCLA, USC, and even the University of San Francisco. We had some of our colleagues that are doing first-gen research at all these institutions. Dr. Daniel Solorzano, he's a professor of education Chicano studies over at UCLA. He's done a lot of work specifically around first-gen and community college students. So his work really centers on community colleges. So we started this off. Now, when we do professional development at El Camino around first-gen, we have an event, but then faculty get into something that's called a site group, so scholarly group, and where they take a certain portion of whatever was covered and they work on it for an entire academic year. So that could be the hidden curriculum, that could have been academic imposter syndrome, and they work on it. And it's not just faculty, we also have we have our staff, people from student affairs, as well as students who are part of these site groups that work on something for an entire year. And then we host a symposium at the end of the year to see what, they came up with, their plans for improving a particular area. And then we try to take that information that the faculty have compiled together and take it back to the task force and see, what can we do to better improve the lives of our first-gen students at El Camino College. So that's normally how we run a lot of our professional development for our faculty around first-gen issues. Our second phase did involve creating a first-gen student task force. I put this quote up. This is a quote by one of my colleagues at El Camino. I always say he's my favorite math professor at El Camino, and then my other math faculty get upset, but he is. He always says, if it's about us without us, it isn't for us. And so, when we're doing any kind of programming for students, we always want to make sure they are at the table and that this is something that they want to see. So we created a first-gen student task force. We held it again during our college hour when we don't have any classes. We worked with many of the student organizations, but we also work with programs like EOP&S, who sometimes represent more of our non-traditional students, sometimes students who are older as well. This group met for an entire academic year. We looked at all kinds of, different issues that first-gen students face on our campus, but more importantly, we wanted to come up with recommendations that we can really improve the first-gen experience for students coming to El Camino. And so a lot came out of this task force, and the task force, by the way, still continues to meet. We have 2 people from this student task force that is part of the larger task force with student affairs and other people around campus, so that we make sure that there is representation. So here's a couple of things that the students wanted to see as a result of the task force. This was their recommendations. They wanted a first-gen symposium on campus, similar to what they saw the faculty get. In fact, the students even said to us, some of us volunteered for that professional development conference you hosted for faculty, and we really liked it. We want the same thing for us. And so we said, sure, absolutely. That is Patrick Kamanahan. If you're not familiar with his work, he is from the University of San Francisco. He does amazing research around trauma, healing young people from trauma. So he was our keynote speakers. We had breakout sessions also around academic imposter syndrome, also around the hidden curriculum for our students. And so this is one of the events that we hosted at El Camino College. We've also done a lot of work with our STEM faculty on campus, as well as our math and engineering and science achievement program, MESA. El Camino is located down the street from SpaceX. We're about 2.5 miles from SpaceX. We have a really close relationship with them. They conduct tours for our students. And El Camino has also a really, large emphasis on STEM education. It is our second most popular educational program that students select when they come to El Camino. We're also really close to Raytheon, Chevron, and a lot of the other engineering aerospace places around the South Bay. And one of the reasons that we hosted this event, again, had to do with that Student First Gen Task Force. We had students that were representative of STEM who said to us, we really need you to do something around first gen and STEM because our parents, because they didn't go to college, don't understand that STEM takes a little bit longer. So some of our students said, our parents are saying to us, why are you still at El Camino? Why haven't you transferred on to a university? You should have been done by now. That really fully understanding the amount of courses that many of our STEM students have to take, especially in California, before they can transfer into engineering or computer science majors at the universities in the area. Second, we heard from students that were telling us that there was a lot of pressure on them to have to get a job and attend El Camino and be a STEM student at the same time, which many of our students felt would hinder their success. It might even, cause them to drop out altogether. And so in putting together that database, we identified that a lot of our faculty in STEM were actually first gen. And so we hosted several events on campus. This is one of the events. It's a first gen STEM dinner where we invited our STEM faculty, as well as students, as well as parents to come on campus to learn a little bit more about the kinds of programs that we have, but to also hear directly from faculty who were first gen and to really listen to their stories about, what they had to do to be successful. And it was a huge success. We heard from a lot of students that said that really helped them out. And when their parents heard our faculty talk about this class takes X amount of hours to study for, and it's worthwhile, and some of the opportunities that existed in STEM really helped out. So this is something that we have continued to do, and we do different types of partnerships with MESA. And so I think something else that is important when you're doing this work is to try to branch out and to try to partner up with a lot of the other programs. I always tell people first doesn't belong to me. It doesn't belong to student affairs. Take the logo, do whatever you want, create your own programming. Just invite us though, especially if there's a free lunch, invite us. We always like free lunches. This is our own event. I mentioned that we just celebrated first gen last week. And our institution our task force decided that we were going to focus on the Black first gen experience. About 25% of our students at El Camino are Black, but we have seen a decrease at the institution in the last 5 years. And so we really wanted to celebrate the Black first gen experience. And lo and behold, you can see who my keynote was, Dr. Latanya Miles-Reese. I had to have her come on campus and be our keynote. We had a Black first gen alumni chat. This happened obviously during elections. So we also hosted an event on Tuesday, specifically around the power of the Black vote that had high attendance from our students as well. And so again, I just want to point out that when we were celebrating the Black First Gen experience, faculty as well as student affairs had an opportunity to be part of a site group. So we are currently have created multiple groups that are going to be looking at different ways that we can improve the Black First Gen experience for our students. We already have identified that outreach and recruitment needs some work. And we have people that are representative from outreach and recruitment. We have the director of outreach who's going to be part of that group, as well as faculty that are going to be looking at how we outreach to Black students, whether the messaging needs to change. We've also seen a decrease in the number of our students who are receiving the Promise grant at our institution. In California, students can attend community college for free the first 2 years, and which is great. That was not always the case. It wasn't the case when I attended community college, and so it's a huge shift. But we have seen a decline for Black students, and there shouldn't be a decline because the program has no income qualifications. It's open to all students, regardless of income, whether it's your low, middle, or high income. The Promise program is really open to all students. So we've seen a decline in that area, and that's something that we want.
Okay, I don't care about her.
No worries. Josh, do you, any questions? No, it's okay. Any questions? It's a good opportunity to drink water.
I think the quote that you shared, if it's not about us without us, it's not for us, that was impactful for some folks as well. And it's good to keep in mind as well.
Right. Yeah, I got to give Lars credit for that. Anytime we have a meeting, he looks around the room and he does, if we're creating something for students and he doesn't see students in there, like we have to stop and make sure we do this again. So this is again, just a little bit about how we celebrated Black First Gen last week. And a couple of other things that we've done at El Camino. We've hosted some First Gen rallies at El Camino as well with our students. We connected with all of the programs that exist on campus and programs that specifically work with First Gen students so that they can table kind of a resource fair and have our students learn a little bit more about what the programs have to offer, the eligibility requirements, and some of the benefits. So this is one of the First Gen events that we first did when we kicked this whole thing off. And something else that we've done with help from the students is we created First Gen swag, which we thought was really important for this work. As you can see on the right, I'm wearing one of the sweatshirts. I'm not wearing it today for this presentation, but I am wearing one of the sweatshirts in that photo. We also created these First Gen pins that we asked faculty if they would wear. So one of them says First Gen faculty. I know it's hard to see, the First Gen faculty. We also created them for students, First Gen students. We created them for First Gen allies, right? Because we recognize that not everyone who works at El Camino College is the first to go in their family. So we also have some ally pins. And then something else that we did is we created First Gen grads, right? You know, yes, we are community college, right? And yes, the definition of, you know, First Gen is technically from a four-year institution, but for many of our students, you know, getting that degree from El Camino College or your community college, you know, that is a big deal. And it's something that should be celebrated. And, you know, our state, 10 years ago, passed some legislation. We created an associate degree here that really helped to increase the number of our students that were earning a degree. So we've seen a dramatic increase in students, in some cases getting anywhere between 3 to 4 degrees when they leave our community college. So we give these pins out as well at our graduation every year. And then we give out a lot of the t-shirts, a lot of the sweatshirts at different celebrations that we have throughout the year. And I love when I walk around campus and I see students wearing this, right? It makes me feel so happy and proud. I'm also very fortunate that I grew up in this neighborhood. So I grew up maybe about 15 minutes away from El Camino College. So I see my students everywhere I go. Here, you know, the market, pumping gas, doesn't matter. I run into my students, so I'll see them sometimes wearing the first gen gear, and I love it. I absolutely love seeing it. So, by the way, that design was created by one of the students who was on the task force, and then we have some other designs that are not in this photo. So something else that you can do to really create that first gen pride on your institution, so that students are happy to see it. So I'm at the end of my slide, and then I really want to open it up and hear what you all are doing, some of the initiatives that you're doing, whether that's in the classroom if you're a professor at your institution, whether you're working in student affairs, whether you're working in financial aid, because we've really looked at so many different areas of our campus to try to see what we can do to help first gen students. So, you know, a couple of high impact practices I think that are helpful for creating your own first gen initiative, but you've already done that. You know, you're already doing amazing work. I told Josh before we started, you don't need me. And when he was telling me everything that you are already doing, I was like, you guys have it. Like, this is good already. I would definitely say, have opportunities to share your first gen story. One of the things that I didn't show you in any of my slides, but if you walk onto El Camino's college campus, we have all these banners when you're walking through, and it was kind of hard to see it in that video, but those are photos of alumni as well as current faculty members who work for El Camino that identified as first gen. So we put those banners around campus so that when students walk onto campus, they can see themselves reflected, and they can also see that a lot of people who work at El Camino are first gen. We've also created some short videos that faculty have agreed to participate in to tell their first gen stories. They're really short videos, they're less than maybe 20 seconds. We have shown some of those videos on our Instagram, our social media, our Twitter as well. So if you haven't done that, that's a great way for students to see these videos, especially since many of our students are on social media, specifically Instagram and TikTok. So we've uploaded some of those videos as well. And then this is a lot of work to do. So I always tell campuses, create a task force if you can, if you're in a position to do that, so that you're not doing the work by yourself. And that you don't always feel like you're the one who has to do all the first gen programming at your institution. As you can see from some of the slides that I shared, we had a lot of partnerships, right, with folks in STEM. We've had partnerships in academic affairs. We've had partnerships even with student development, just, you know, as many partnerships as we can, and definitely make sure that students are part of that task force if at all possible. And then the last items is to really, you know, celebrate your first gen students. You know, create that celebration around your institution so that they know that this is not a deficit to be the first in your family to go to college, but that really you are paving the way, right? As a result of me earning my degree from El Camino and then eventually later from UCLA, my sister attended, she's an MSW today. My younger brother attended, and he has a bachelor's in business. You know, cousins attended. You know, I'm still that person in the family that anytime anybody wants to go to college, I get the phone call. In fact, by the way, when I'm done with this presentation, I'm going to hop on another Zoom call with a cousin of mine whose daughter is going to college, and so I got to check her application to the UC system and make sure that's all in check. You know, so celebrating your first gen students is really important, and you'll see that it really changes the narrative for many of your first gen students. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing and stop talking, and would love to hear what are some of the things that your institution is doing. And if you want to show your camera, I promise I don't bite. Love to see you guys, but if not, don't worry about it. So Josh, is there any questions?
I am looking at the
Well, now I
chat
can
now.
see the chat.
Well, first, I just want to thank you for sharing your story and what all you've been doing at El Camino as well. I'm looking for any questions that folks have in the comment section. There is one in the chat here. Do you have recommendations for helping those who are not doing the work currently and may or may not be first gen, understanding why this work is so important to what we're doing, especially, given our position at the community college?
Right. And so I think, one of the things that I didn't mention is that, as a result of doing this work, we've seen increases in retention at El Camino College for our students. We've also seen that I think the faculty professional development that we've been doing specifically around first-gen students, we've had faculty now that have launched a podcast specifically for first-gen students, and I was a guest on that podcast last week. So, but now, I mean, we thought that was amazing when they came to us and said, we want to do a podcast now so that, faculty, they're running, if they're going on a walk, they're going shopping, they could listen to this and hear a little bit more about why it's important to help first-gen students. So, that's been, I think, one of the great benefits of this entire initiative, just like people kind of popping up all around campus and saying, we can do this work too. We also have faculty that have created a first-gen statement for their syllabus, and they have it on their syllabus. So, kind of a way of letting students know, hey, I was first-gen too. And we even have some faculty that were first-gen and they were transfer students as well, which is really helpful to our students because we also participate in National Transfer Week here at El Camino College. But I think having that syllabus statement is really helpful because sometimes, right, a lot of our first-gen students, because the hidden curriculum is so real, it's such a part of their experience that they're sometimes afraid to ask those questions, right? The research, especially around first-gen males, many of our first-gen males, especially men of color, will not always ask for help when they need it, will not always ask for the resources when they need it, right? And so I think that's another reason that this work has been important. And, you might not want to be part of a task force or something, and I think that's okay. We can't, we have certain members that are part of our task force, but we've had faculty participate in so many different ways, which is why we did the survey. What would you be willing to be a part of? So I think for everyone who's on this call, you might not be a member of the task force, but maybe you have time to add a statement to your syllabus. Maybe you can share your first-gen story during first-gen week like we're doing right now. Maybe you can speak at a new student orientation, right? Or be part of some event on campus where students are learning a little bit more about your own first-gen experience. It's a great way for students to connect with you, I think, in ways that maybe they might not have been able to connect, especially for a lot of our students, because, I'm sure all of you have had those conversations with a student who might be struggling in a certain class, and you say, well, have you talked to your faculty member? And they're like, no, right? For a lot of our students, they put the faculty member so high up here on a pedestal, right? And they're so afraid to go to that office hours or to send that email. So that in itself becomes like a first-gen conversation that I have to have with a lot of my students. In fact, we cover that in our orientation. How do you talk to a faculty member, right? If that's not something that is part of your culture, or you can't go home to your mom and dad and ask them about like that FAFSA application and how you should fill it out, right? So the hidden curriculum is something that our students like really deal with on a daily basis. But I think when anything that you build for first-gen students, all your students benefit. All your students benefit. We have seen that at our institution, but we've also seen it with our international community as well, which is why we decided to go with that second definition.
Yeah. I'm interested to hear your opinion or your experience in engaging with those students. I know we always at Ivy Tech, we talk about involving students, and we try to involve students as much as we can in policies, but we also understand that, many of them are working, many of them have family obligations, and they might not actually be able to come to a meeting or something like that. So have you been able to figure out maybe unique ways of involving those students?
In terms of, you're talking about if you had a first-gen task force?
Whether it's a task force or helping them navigate better ways that we can, uncover the hidden curriculum or navigate the physical campus?
Right. So we've definitely, at our institution, we do have campus ambassadors, and we also have something that's called campus digital ambassadors. So I'm not sure if you heard that terminology before. But these are some of our students who, live and breathe on social media, and they are really good at sharing our events on Instagram, on TikTok, creating those videos, tweeting it out, whatever we have to do. I can tell you that last week when we had our first gen week, I spent a ton of time with that group of students. As a result, I've gotten better with social media as well. I've learned so many tips and tricks from them. I have to say that social media has really helped us in terms of getting more students to participate, especially right now, being in this virtual environment. One of the things that's interesting, we had higher numbers for all of our first gen events this semester than we did last year when we were in person and we were providing free food. We had higher numbers this time. Something else that happened this time is we had a lot of parents that were part of our first gen programming this fall semester than we've ever had. We made the Zoom link public, so really anybody could have logged into any of our events last week. It didn't require an elcamino.edu email account. So that is definitely one way that we've been involved, but the other that we've gotten student engagement, but the other way is that students have been part of the programming. They were initially part of this from the very beginning, and they have decided, here's what we want to see, here's how we want to partner. And we also when we have a student event specifically around first gen, we don't run the program, meaning, they don't see Dr. Mosqueda come in and do the welcome, be the moderator, ask the questions. They do that all. And so we kind of make sure that the students are always visible in a lot of the first gen programming. And it's been a great way to really help them with their leadership skills, with their coordination skills. It's been a plus, I think, for all of us. But I think that's one of the reasons we've been able to get, the number of students that we've had in the last the last 5 years. But it didn't happen overnight. It took years. So, even though we're going into our 6th year, it took a while to get to that point. Because at first, when we first did it, people were like, well, what's first gen? What is this? What is this about, right? So we had to do a lot of work to get to that point. I think I saw a question. Did you market the program to parents in any specific ways? We never marketed any of the program to parents. It was just to the El Camino, student body, as well as to the staff that work at El Camino, staff and faculty. But because most of our students now are virtual, and mom and dad in a lot of cases are also in the room, and we would see them hop on. And we even had some parents who were typing in the chat. They were asking us questions about the first gen experience and the first gen initiative. So I think it was just like an added benefit for us, but we didn't do anything special. We do have which I didn't talk about in the slides either, we do have a first gen parent orientation that we host every fall semester. So we normally host it in person, but obviously because of COVID, we had to host that virtually. And again, we ended up getting more parents in the virtual environment than we did when we are in person. For the parent orientation at El Camino, we would normally host that in the late afternoon because a lot of our parents work. So we would host it by about 5:30 to maybe 7 o'clock. And we would average anywhere between 150 to maybe 200 parents that would attend. So it was really well attended, and it's really a partnership between counseling, student services, and student life, as well as academic affairs. So parents would come, learn obviously a little bit more about the institution, but it really was geared more at first gen parents. So we also had a first gen parent panel as part of that program as well, to really teach students, or not students, teach the parents how they can support their son and daughter while they're at El Camino, and really teach them that, you know, if something goes wrong in their courses, we have tutoring, we have all these services that are available. So we've hosted the first gen parent orientation now for about 4.5 years, and it's been very popular ever since we integrated that.
I think there were a couple questions. We wanted to make sure we attributed the quote correctly. You said it was from Lars?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, that's Lars. That's not my quote. I wish it was. That was Lars. Yeah, so yeah, the quote wasn't from a student. That's from Lars. It's one of my faculty members who teaches math here at El Camino College.
It's a really good quote.
Yeah.
Make sure you let him know.
Right? I tell him that all the time. I said, anywhere, any meeting I'm at, Lars, I'm always thinking of your quote. and he makes sure that he says it. Yep, that's correct, Josh. That's exactly how you spell it.
Okay.
Oh, his last name is Jesset. Sarah. That I have to look up how he spells his last name. So I might have to get back. I'll email you that, Josh, his last name. And I'll CC Lars and let him know you
loved it.
You were a hit today. You were a hit today.
Any other folks have questions? I think that we are caught up on the chat.
Any other questions? Oh, Rachel's gonna Rachel, if you make a T-shirt with that, let me know. I have to let Lars know that. Lars, just so you know, Lars puts it at the top of his agenda meetings. He's the chair of the math department. So when he has a meeting, it's always at the top of his agenda.
I love that.
So I'll have to let you know. But yes, you know, feel free also, you know, if there's anything I mentioned in the presentation, anything you'd like to see an example of or whatever, you know, send me an email. I don't know if I could put my email in the chat. Feel free, we're more than happy to share any of the work that we've done, because other institutions have been great about sharing the work that they are doing and really kind of helped us. I have to give a lot of credit to UCLA because they really helped us out in the beginning. Also, if you're interested in looking at any of the programming that we did at El Camino last week, you can visit our First Gen webpage. All of the recordings, including Dr. Latanya Miles-Reed's keynote, is also on there. You can download it, you can view it. It's great. So that was all of our programming for last week. We don't just do programming, you know, during National First Gen Week, just to be clear. We have programming that happens all year long. And one of the things that we try to do, so for example, our programs that will take place in spring, we usually will begin to plan them out in December. We have a planning retreat so that by January, when we come back to the institution, all of the events are listed for students. And there is a registration for all of the events that occur in Zoom world for our students. So they do have to register ahead of time. And we tend to have per semester about 3 to 4 different events that we host. Last year, we really focused on the first gen entrepreneur, because we had a lot of students who were on the task force that were business majors, and they wanted to learn a little bit more about what it takes to own a business, you know, all kinds of different questions. So we were able to tap into our business faculty who conducted some of those workshops for our students. So we did this whole series on being first gen and going into business for yourself. All right. So
Well, thank you once again for taking the time out of your morning and joining us and sharing a little bit about, the work that you've done at El Camino for the last few years to help raise our first gen student voices and experiences. I think I speak for everyone when I say that I feel a bit more inspired than I was at the beginning of the day to, just think about all the opportunities we have to continue these conversations beyond this week and really, be a lasting presence for first gen students at the college as well.
Oh,
So thank you once again.